wind howled across the dusty plains, a wail that echoed through the small town of Dry Gulch. Every cowboy and cowhand knew that sound well. It was the cry of something old and restless, something that had witnessed countless stories, some tragic, some filled with hope, but none quite like the tale of Sarah Mae. It all began on a sweltering summer evening when the sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and violet. The saloon doors swung open, and a commotion erupted inside. Men laughed, women danced, and the piano struck a joyful tune. In the midst of this chaos, a hush suddenly swept over the room when a newcomer stepped inside, thin as a rail, with dark hair that framed her face like a tempest. It was Sarah Mae, the girl everyone called Cursed. Whispers flickered like shadows, trailing behind her as she made her way to the bar. "She's bad news," they said. But it wasn't just idle gossip. The stories of Sarah Mae stretched back to her childhood's strange accidents, mysterious illnesses, and the faint echo of tragedy that tethered itself to her like an unforgiving chain. The townsfolk believed she carried a darkness that brought misfortune wherever she went. But out on the fringes of the bustling saloon, one man didn't let the town's talk sway him. Jesse McAllister, a hardened cowboy with deep creases in his sun-kissed skin, and the kind of eyes that had seen too much and yet still held hope. He'd spent years on his horse, chasing the horizon, and he wasn't one to be easily influenced by the gossip of small-minded souls. Jesse had a heart buried deep beneath the layers of his rough exterior. He knew that sometimes you had to look beyond the surface to find the truth. So when Sarah Mae approached, her gaze steady yet wary, he felt compelled to listen. He asked, his voice a low rumble. She looked surprised, almost taken aback. "Whiskey," she replied softly, her voice like the wind rustling through the grass. Jesse signaled to the bartender, pouring 2 shot glasses of amber liquid. He asked, trying to break the ice, but Sarah's eyes dropped to the bar, revealing a wall built from years of rejection and heartache. "Only in dreams," she murmured. In that moment, Jesse saw her not as a cursed girl, but as someone who had been misunderstood. He felt a tug in his heart, something he couldn't shake off. The clink echoed between them, a fragile bridge of understanding forming amidst the stormy whispers of the saloon. That night, as the moon rose high above the plains, Jesse made a decision. He would take her under his wing. He could teach her to ride, to feel the freedom of the open range. Maybe, just maybe, he could help her shed the layers of fear that had trapped her for so long. Morning came with a vibrant dawn, the sun spilling golden light across the field. Jesse mounted his trusty steed, a stout horse named Buck, and watched as Sarah stepped timidly into the arena. The barn doors creaked open, and the scent of hay mingled with the earthy aroma of leather saddles. She wore an old dress that danced loosely around her knees, inadequate for the day ahead. Jesse called, trying to mask the nervousness in her eyes with a smile. She hesitated, then nodded, determination flickering. As they began, Jesse instinctively knew he needed to build her confidence. He led her through the basics, how to approach the horse, understand its movements, and feel its heartbeat beneath her fingertips. Each time he showed her something new, Sarah's smile grew brighter. She was learning, and with each stride, the shadows in her eyes began to lift ever so slightly. Days turned into weeks, the sun slicing through the unforgiving skies like a blade. Each lesson was a dance, a trial of balance and trust. Often, Jesse found himself caught up in her laughter as she wobbled and spun when trying to mount. They shared stories of lost dreams and wished-for futures, the heavy weight of their pasts cracking into beams of light. But the town outside continued to murmur. The townsfolk couldn't understand why a respected cowboy like Jesse would associate with the girl they deemed cursed. Gossip flew like arrows, aiming for Jesse's heart, threatening to wound him. But he remained steadfast, a rock against the crashing waves for Sarah. One Sunday afternoon, while the sky glittered with promise and the world seemed to breathe in sync, tragedy struck. A storm brewed, suddenly dark clouds swirling like angry spirits. Jesse and Sarah had taken to the plains, hearts soaring through velvet skies when the tempest bore down upon them. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the world in flashes, and thunder rolled like the growl of a beast. Jesse shouted over the roar, but panic danced in Sarah's eyes. She reined in Buck, her horse, trembling beneath her. The swirling winds caught her, and in a dreadful instant the storm turned into chaos. Buck stumbled and Sarah was thrown. Time slowed. Jesse lunged forward, grabbing her just as she fell. He felt the electric shock of the storm as they hit the ground, a wave of raw power washing over them. When the storm passed, the air was heavy with silence. Jesse lay on the ground, Sarah cradled in his arms, both inhaling the scent of rain-soaked earth, battling against fading fears. Against all odds, they were alive. But fear lingered in the air, thick like a fog that wouldn't lift. As they returned to town, bruised but alive, Jesse felt the townsfolk's eyes on them, burning with judgment. "You shouldn't have bothered," one man sneered as they walked through. Jesse felt the pain for Sarah radiating around them, but he stood tall, a wall of defiance against the tide of negativity crashing down. Jesse shouted, his voice capturing the attention of every man in the saloon. The room went silent, a thick, choking silence that held an unspoken truth. "She's no curse. She survived. She's stronger than you'll ever know." Anger sparked in his chest like a wildfire, fueled by a brotherly instinct. In that moment, Jesse lifted Sarah's chin, meeting her gaze, a silent promise exchanging between them. "You are not cursed," he whispered, filled with conviction. She blinked back, tears, the weight of his words washing over her, wrapping her in warmth and understanding. Days turned into nights, and the sunlight poured golden rays over the land. Sarah slowly started to find her place in the town, riding with Jesse beside her, smiling bravely when they passed those who had once shunned her. She learned to stand tall and hold her chin high, even when the whispers still followed. With every ride, every laugh shared, and every challenge met, Sarah transformed. No longer the girl weighed down by a sense of doom, but a woman uncovering her power, discovering that a storm didn't define her. She was fierce, filled with a wild magic that came from being alive against the odds. As winter approached, the colors shifted from deep green to a palette of muted browns and vibrant reds. The town was preparing for the annual cattle drive, a race that separated the men from the boys, a chance to earn respect and admiration. Jesse could see the fire in Sarah's eyes. She wanted to join in. Would the townsfolk accept her? Would she find her footing among them, a place worth standing? "There's only one way to find out," he replied when she nervously asked if she should ride. "You've come so far." The day of the drive arrived, a brisk morning where cold air wrapped around them like an embrace. Jesse felt a flutter of pride swell in his chest as he watched her mount Buck, a new confidence flowing from her every movement. The townsfolk eyed her skeptically as they prepared, shuffling and shifting at what they deemed foolishness. But today was different. Today she wasn't just a cursed girl, she was riding like she belonged. As the ride began, cows clattered through the dust, their hooves stomping in a rhythm that echoed the racing hearts of those on horseback. Sarah rode confidently beside Jesse, laughing and shouting, feeling the connection of the wild, free and alive. The ride brought sweat on their brows and unanswered challenges in their hearts. But just then, disaster lurked around the corner. A stray calf bolted, separating from the herd, fear driving it wild. Jesse immediately noticed but knew it would take a team to corral it back. Without hesitation, he called on Sarah. "Go." And with those words, she charged into the unknown, hearts pounding as the dust around them swirled upward like smoke. Sarah maneuvered elegantly alongside Jesse, both of them focusing on one singular goal, their teamwork cutting through the chaos like a razor's edge. They turned the calf, nudging it gently but firmly back toward the herd. The town watched in awe, eyes wide open. In that moment, Sarah, no longer just an outsider, became part of something bigger, a community where they could see her true spirit. As they herded the calf back into place, a murmur broke through the crowd, a shift. The whispers faded, replaced by applause, a sound of acceptance reverberating through the air. Sarah Mae, once the girl dubbed cursed, had proven her mettle. Later that evening, in the glow of an orange sunset casting long shadows over Dry Gulch, Jesse and Sarah sat side by side, looking over the plains. The sky seemed endless, stretching into the horizon, full of uncharted possibilities. "You were extraordinary today," Jesse said, warmth flooding his voice. Sarah smiled, her heart bursting with joy and something deeper, a bond forged in the fires of fear and hope. Her eyes sparkled in the fading light. And there in that moment, among the whispers of the past, they found solace. The winds of Dry Gulch carried their laughter forward, marking the chapter where two souls, once lonely and shunned, discovered their strength and acceptance in each other. In a world that had called her cursed, Sarah Mae had finally begun to understand she was everything but. She was a force of nature, forged by challenges, and embraced by a cowboy who refused to let her journey be defined by the shadows of others. Together, they faced whatever came next, unyielding and unbreakable, forever riding into the sunset. The wind was biting cold that evening, but you could feel the warmth of the campfire crackling against the crisp air. It was a night like any other on the edge of the frontier, but the atmosphere was electric. The cattle were restless and the shadows flickered like ghosts among the trees. And then it happened. A scream pierced the stillness, raw and terrified. Jesse McAllister, a seasoned cowboy known for his unyielding nature, shot upright. He muttered, his eyes narrowing in the direction of the sound. The flicker of firelight illuminated his rugged face, revealing the deep lines of a man who'd seen his share of heartache. Without a second thought, he grabbed his horse's reins, determination coursing through him. He charged into the dark, every instinct telling him that trouble awaited just around the bend. And what he found made his heart sink. The source of the scream was a frail figure pinned against a tree, surrounded by a group of rowdy townsfolk. One man shouted, his voice dripping with disdain. The crowd jeered, laughter mixing with the winds as they surrounded Sarah Mae, a girl not much older than 16, with dark hair tangled like the branches of the woods around her. She shivered not just from the cold but from the weight of years of fear and rejection. Jesse's heart raced. He had heard the rumors, the stories of misfortune that followed Sarah like a dark cloud. She was known as the girl who brought disaster, and those who suffered under her shadow wouldn't let her forget it. But as he watched the cruelty unfold, a fire ignited within him, urging him to step forward. Jesse's voice boomed, slicing through the chaos. The crowd halted, their laughter dying in their throats, turning to face him with surprise and anger. "You all ought to be ashamed. That's a child." For a moment it felt as if the world held its breath. The tension hung thick in the air, swirling like dust in a sunbeam. Then, with determination carved into his features, Jesse walked toward Sarah Mae. He gently reached out and grasped her arm, the warmth of his touch sending a jolt of comfort through her. "Come on, Sarah," he said softly, leading her away from the suffocating crowd. As they walked, he could feel the eyes of the town drilling into his back, silently questioning his decisions. They retreated to his camp at the edge of the woods, a small flickering light of warmth contrasting with the darkness they left behind. Sarah sat on an old log, tangled emotions swirling in her eyes as she stared into the fire. She finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jesse could see the tremors in her hands, the scars of hurt etched deep into her spirit. "Because people are afraid of what they don't understand," he replied, sitting beside her. He knew all too well the damage that fear could inflict. After losing his mother to illness, he'd spent years grappling with a deep loneliness. It had turned him into a closed-off man who trusted no one. But Sarah, a girl who was born into a world of cruelty, was different. "I might bring bad luck," she said, tears welling in her eyes. Jesse took a deep breath, searching for the right words. Sometimes life throws us storms we don't expect, but those storms don't define us. That night ignited a flicker of hope in Sarah's heart. As days passed under Jesse's guidance, she began to find her footing. He showed her how to care for the horses, to understand their spirits. Each day, she battled her fears, slowly trusting herself, and through her trust in him, she also learned to trust in her own abilities. As they spent more time together, something else began to blossom in the lonely expanses of the wilderness. A bond strengthened over shared laughter and whispered dreams beneath starlit skies. They shared tales. Jesse spoke of battles fought and friends lost, while Sarah recounted the tales of tragic events that had haunted her childhood. One chilly morning, they rode out together, the crisp air filling their lungs like freedom itself. Jesse led the way with Sarah following closely behind, a newfound sense of purpose coursing through her. They were heading to the wide open fields where the sunlight streamed down, draping the landscape in a golden glow. "Today you'll learn how to ride," Jessie announced, turning back to flash her an encouraging smile. Her eyes lit up, excitement bubbling inside her, but trepidation wrestled with her enthusiasm. This was the moment she feared most. She asked, doubt creeping into her voice. Jessie drew in a breath, finding a delicate balance in his response. As the sun climbed higher, Jessie helped her mount the horse, a gentle mare named Daisy. A rush of exhilaration twined with nervousness coursed through her veins as she took the reins. With gentle ease, Jessie guided her through the basics of riding, his voice steady and reassuring. With each trot, Sarah felt weightlessness. The worries of the world receded, the whispers of the townsfolk faded away. It was just her and Daisy moving in sync, her fears evaporating into the wind. Jessie's presence anchored her, a steady force reminding her that her past did not dictate her future. 1 week later, a storm swept through the plains, a wild tempest that ravaged everything in its wake. Jessie and Sarah had just returned from their morning ride when the clouds began to churn ominously overhead. Rain beat against the ground, turning the earth to mud. But as the lightning split the sky, Sarah felt a strange tug in her gut, a slight panic rising. "Stay close," Jessie warned, eyes scanning the horizon. But just then, a flash of movement caught Sarah's eye, a kicking, wild horse, separated from the herd and struggling against the chaos of the storm. Instinct kicked in. She shouted, her voice cutting through the cacophony. "No!" Jessie rushed to her side, gripping her arm, but she was determined, the fire within her igniting once again. She insisted, breaking away, her heart racing as she dashed toward the chaos. Against the raging winds, she forced her way toward the frightened animal, drawing from the strength Jessie had helped her find. Jessie sighed, torn between panic and pride. With a deep breath, he mounted his horse and rode after her, knowing he had to protect her from danger. Sarah reached the horse, crouching low as the winds howled around her. "Shh, it's okay," she whispered, meeting the wild eyes of the fleeing animal. She extended her hand gently, keeping her voice calm. There was a deep, instinctual understanding between them. Hours spent with Jessie learning to bond with horses had created a connection, one she never thought she could possess. With careful patience, Sarah approached, and slowly the horse stopped kicking. She could feel the pulse of fear residing within its chest, mirroring the pounding of her own heart. The storm rallied angrily, but she pushed through, moving closer until she felt the wildness soften. Jessie arrived moments later, heart pounding, breathless from the chase. As he watched her, he realized that she wasn't just the girl everyone had labeled cursed. She was a warrior in her own right. The realization flooded him with pride. Together, they calmed the horse and guided it back toward safety, the storm raging around them like a furious beast. When they returned to the barn, soaked to the bone and exhilarated, something had shifted between them. In that moment, Sarah Mae was no longer the girl cursed. She was Sarah, a spirit unbroken, someone who had learned to rise above the darkness. With every sunset that followed, the town began to notice. Whispers of ridicule transformed into murmurs of respect. Folks started seeing past the tales that had haunted her, recognizing her strength, realizing they were wrong about her all along. The girl that once was a pariah was now turning into a beacon of resilience. As weeks turned into months, Sarah stepped into her own. She no longer flinched at the shadows that followed her, she owned them. Jessie remained her steadfast friend, a lighthouse in her storm, but she found her own light. Day after day, they rode together, their laughter mingling with the whispers of the plains, a harmonious melody of freedom. Then came the day of the annual cattle drive, a highlight in the small community. Jessie was excited, but he sensed that the full challenge of the day rested on Sarah's shoulders. This was her moment to truly shine. Could she ride with the best of them? Jessie asked, mounting Buck, his trusty stallion, as Sarah joined him with a mix of thrill and apprehension. "More than ever," she replied, though she knew the doubt lingered in the corners of her mind. As they gathered with the rest of the cowhands, a wave of unease rippled through the crowd. Sarah could feel whispers behind her, the weight of judgment still heavy, but Jessie gave her a nod, a silent promise that he would be right there beside her. The day exploded into action as the cattle burst forth, roaring across the plains. Sarah felt the rush of adrenaline, the excitement of the open range, the thrill of the chase feeding her spirit. Jesse rode at her side, his confidence bolstering hers. The trail was long, the sun baking out the heat, and yet as they rode, she realized she belonged here with the townsfolk watching. For the first time, the whispers faded into cheers, a swelling tide of acceptance crashing against the shore of her heart. As evening descended, the sun bled colors across the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant hues. Sarah felt transformed. Alive, a girl once called cursed, now emerging victorious. And when Jesse looked at her, pride brimming in his eyes, she knew they had crossed a threshold, an unbreakable bond forged from kindness, resilience, and understanding. Standing on that open plain, surrounded by the beauty of possibility, Sarah Mae inhaled deeply, letting it all wash over her. She was no longer the girl shackled by a label. She was a fierce, independent spirit who had carved a place for herself in this world. And beside her stood Jesse, a cowboy who had taken her in when everyone else had turned away, showing her that even the darkest storms could lead toward a path of light. Together, they would brave any world, united in their pursuit of freedom, belonging, and the truth that they crafted together. The past didn't define them. It was the choices they made moving forward that would chart their course, with the wild freedom of the plains stretching endlessly before them, waiting for new adventures to unfold. A sudden clap of thunder rolled across the Kansas plains, echoing like a warning from the heavens. The cattle shifted uneasily in the pens, and Jesse McAllister could feel the tension crackling in the air. It was the kind of day that made a man want to stay indoors, shielded from the growing storm. But for him, there was no choice. The work had to be done. As he tightened the straps on his saddlebags, a figure emerged through the haze of dust. It was Sarah Mae, the girl the entire town referred to as cursed. Each step she took seemed heavy, laden with the weight of expectations and judgments that trailed behind her like a dark shadow. "Jessie," she called, her voice wavering under the weight of the storm clouds above. He took a moment to absorb the sight of her. Sarah had thin arms and a sad look in her wide eyes. Despite the whispers of the townsfolk, Jesse couldn't see a curse. He saw a girl with courage, ready to face whatever slate the day would bring. "Sure, come on. We could use all the hands we can get," he replied, not quite meeting her gaze. They moved toward the herd, where the wind swept through the prairie grass like a ghost. Sarah had come to work at Jesse's ranch after leaving home, driven away by a string of misfortunes that had earned her a reputation she didn't deserve. She wasn't just an outcast, she was a pariah. Rumors floated around town like tumbleweeds, sticking to anyone who dared come close. She asked, peering up at the darkening sky. "Could be," Jesse said, keeping his tone light but pragmatic. As they drove the herd toward the pasture, Sarah stayed close to Jesse, her heart racing. Each time she heard laughter or careless comments from the workers, she felt the sting of exclusion. Jesse, however, treated her differently. He taught her to ride, to rope, and to care for the horses, which she embraced with the passion of someone desperately seeking a place to belong. As the sky darkened, the first drops of rain began to fall, pattering like soft whispers against the ground. But there was a different sound, a distinct rustling in the bushes nearby. "Stay close, Sarah," Jesse said, his instincts kicking in as he scanned the surroundings. Without warning, a young deer burst from the underbrush, startling the cattle. The herd bolted in a frenzy, chaos erupting where there had been calm just moments ago. Jesse sprang into action, his voice rising above the storm. "Get to the far side." Sarah's heart pounded as she raced to do as instructed. In the heat of the moment, adrenaline surged through her veins, and for the first time she felt alive. She rode hard, pulling alongside Jesse, who guided her movements with shouts that cut through the mounting storm. But just as they had made some progress, Sarah caught a glance of Jesse's face. His expression was one of strain. He was pushing himself, trying to keep control, and it worried her. Jesse was strong, but he was only one man. He yelled, focusing on the cattle just ahead. In this moment, Sarah wasn't just riding, she was becoming part of the wildness around her. Then it happened. A sudden lightning strike illuminated the sky, followed by a deafening roar of thunder. The cattle panicked, veering off in all directions. Sarah felt her horse buck beneath her. "Hold on," Jesse shouted, but she was already being flung off. She hit the ground hard, the breath knocked out of her, vulnerability seizing her. Everything around her was chaos, blurred by the rain. She staggered to her feet, looking for Jesse, and found him fighting against a stampede. Adrenaline surged through her body, and she felt the primal urge to help him. She charged back into the fray, pushing the fear deep inside her. "Sarah," Jesse called, his voice frantic as he realized she was back on her feet. But she could see the wildness in the cattle's eyes, their panic mirrored in Jesse's. With a mix of intuition and instinct, she shouted at the cattle, waving her arms, desperate to guide them. "This way." To her astonishment, some of the animals began to calm, responding to her voice, the very voice that the town had demonized. Then came Jessie, riding beside her, eyes wide with disbelief. She cried, exhilaration coursing through her. Together, they steered the cattle back, their bond strengthened by the chaos. Finally, the storm calmed, and the last of the frightened beasts filed back calmly into the corral. The air grew still, and all that remained was the sound of rain gently falling. As they surveyed the aftermath, Jessie turned to Sarah, soaking wet but beaming with pride. She could hardly believe it. The girl who was once deemed cursed had just faced the storm head-on. "We did this together," she replied, her heart swelling. The storm passed, but not without leaving its mark. Jessie's admiration illuminated the path toward acceptance. It was a long road, but he was willing to walk it with her. Over the next few weeks, they worked side by side, repairing fences, caring for the cattle, and forging a friendship that felt almost like family. Sarah thrived under his guidance. Some days they'd ride out, talking about dreams, plans for the future, a kind of lightness that had been foreign to her. And on quiet nights, they would share stories by the campfire, laughter settling around them like the stars above. But the peace would soon be challenged. The town's gossip began to resurface. As summer began to draw to a close, whispers turned to shouts. "She's a curse," they would say. Sarah could hear them through the whispers of the wind, their harsh words sending shivers down her spine. One night, a group of men from town came to confront Jesse as he sat by the fire. "You ought to be careful with that girl," one of the men warned, his eyes hard like stone. "Maybe you ought to keep your nose out of my business," Jesse replied, anger flashing through him as he stood. The confrontation escalated, and Jesse felt the weight of the town pressing down on him. Sarah watched from a distance, her heart sinking. The anger in Jesse's eyes mirrored the fear in her own heart. That night, as the fire crackled low, she approached him. "I'm sorry," she said softly, her eyes full of vulnerability. "Don't you dare say that," he replied firmly, stepping closer. "You're more than what they think. You have no idea how strong you are." Tears brimmed in her eyes. "But I'm not like you, Jesse." "No, but you can change your own," he said, grounding her with the strength in his voice. "You don't have to carry their judgments. You're not cursed, Sarah." Days continued to pass, and the tension in town mounted. It wasn't long before the truth hit her. She had been hiding behind fear, hoping that each day would give the town a chance to see her as more than a pariah. But this fear was suffocating, and she had to confront it head-on. Early one morning, before dawn broke, Sarah rode out to Jesse's corral. She needed to confront the truth, to put an end to the whispers haunting her dreams. She needed courage to stand before the town and defy what they thought of her once and for all. Jesse joined her, sensing the fire in her determination. He asked, curiosity replacing concern. "To the town," she said firmly, sliding off Daisy, her horse. He asked, stepping closer. "I've lived in the shadows long enough. It's time I stepped out into the light," she replied, her voice steady, seemingly ferocious. They rode toward Dry Gulch, the town where Sarah had lived all her life, the place that had branded her with a scarlet letter of judgment. People turned to watch as they rode in a quiet hush falling over the crowd like the calm before a storm. There was a mix of recognition and disdain in their expressions, which only fueled her resolve. Jesse dismounted and turned to her. "I'm proud of you, no matter what they say," he whispered, squeezing her shoulder. Taking a deep breath, Sarah stepped forward, heart racing, eyes bravely locked onto the faces that had whispered her name in scorn. She shouted, her voice booming through the square. The crowd shifted uneasily, disbelief etched across their faces. One voice called out, laced with bitterness. Sarah shot back, anger igniting within her. "Have you seen the good that I've done? The lives I've saved? You only see a story, a whisper." In that moment, something shifted in the air. Her words hung heavy, raw, and real. Jessie stood firmly beside her, a steadfast presence. Sarah continued, her confidence building. "Every misfortune is not mine to bear. I am more than your judgments." As the crowd listened, Sarah felt the tension give way to whispers of uncertainty. Some faces softened while others remained hardened, but she pressed on. "What defines us is not our past, but the choices we make moving forward. I choose to be brave." The silence hung for a beat, stretching towards the horizon like the dawn, and one by one people began a step forward full of uncertainty but undeniably present. "Maybe we've been too quick to judge," an older woman finally said, her voice crackling with emotion. "It's true," another voice chimed in. Something shifted. A wave of understanding began to ripple through the crowd, dissolving the harshness that had once filled the air. Sarah declared, her voice steady, free from tears. She felt Jessie's proud gaze upon her, felt the courage they had nurtured together breaking through the chains of judgment. In all the chaos, a little boy stepped forward, his wide eyes filled with curiosity. He asked, pointing at Jessie and Sarah. Laughter erupted, breaking the tension. And just like that, something magical unfolded in the small town square. Laughter, open hearts, acceptance. The girl who had once been cursed was being embraced by her community. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, burying the day in hues of gold and orange, Sarah stood tall, her spirit unfurling like the wings of a mighty eagle. The storm had passed, and in its wake lay the promise of a new beginning, not just for her, but for everyone. And as Jessie watched, he felt a fire ignite within him too, the kind of fire that blooms not just from love, but from the power of courage, resilience, and unwavering strength. Together, they had overcome. They had rewritten their story from one of despair to one of hope, standing at the dawn of a new day, ready to face whatever might come next together. The wind howled across the prairie, bending the tall grass and catching the swirling dust in its grasp. It was a sound that echoed through the dusty streets of Dry Gulch, a town burdened with whispers and tales that refused to die. That evening, the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of crimson and gold, a beautiful contrast to the heaviness that weighed in the hearts of the townsfolk. Out on the outskirts, where the world felt wild and free, Jesse McAllister stood next to the corral, grooming his horse. He was a cowboy through and through, strong, rugged, and a man of few words. Just as the silence settled, a curious noise broke through, a clattering of hooves mixed with the sound of hurried footsteps. He turned to see Sarah Mae racing toward him, her heart in her eyes, almost glowing against a backdrop of misfortune that always seemed to follow her. "Jessie," she shouted, breathless and frantic. Her arrival wasn't uncommon, but the urgency in her voice sent a shiver down Jessie's spine. The town had labeled her as cursed, an unfortunate girl born under bad omens, always bringing disaster in her wake. He'd heard the tales, seen how the townsfolk stepped lightly around her, as if proximity would somehow bring them down into the depths she usually dwelled in. But Jesse had never believed the stories. He saw her courage, her spirit, even if the rest of the town couldn't. He asked, stepping closer, his brow furrowing with concern, "It's the cattle," she said, her eyes wide like saucers, glistening under the fading light. Just then, a crack of lightning lit up the sky, casting a brief flicker over the desolate fields. The sound of hooves thundering in the distance made Jesse's heart race. "We need to go." They rushed toward the sound, their hearts pounding. As they neared the pasture, Jesse caught sight of a herd of cattle running wild, panic-stricken, bolting in all directions. The sight threatened to turn his stomach. It was a chaos born from fear, a stampede that could do real harm. He shouted to Sarah, glancing back to ensure she was right behind him. Her presence bolstered his courage, making him feel like he could face anything that came their way. As they entered the midst of the chaos, Sarah's eyes darted. She yelled, her voice nearly drowned out by the cacophony of the frightened beasts. Jesse shouted back, the adrenaline pumping through his veins, "But we have to guide them." Taking a deep breath, Jesse called out to the circling cattle, trying to steer them back toward the pens. He was no stranger to handling wild livestock, but this was different. The energy of the herd coursed through the air, thick and electric, setting his instincts on fire. Suddenly, a rustling in the tall grass nearby caught Sarah's attention. In a heartbeat, her instincts kicked in, urging her to look closer. And there it was, a mountain lion lurking, poised to strike. Her heart dropped. She shouted, fear gripping her voice. He shot her a look, a silent acknowledgement that propelled them both into action. With a few quick movements, he gestured for Sarah to flank the herd. "I'll distract it," Sarah exclaimed, the blood rising in her ears. "I'll be fine." He couldn't afford to lose her. Jesse burst toward the lion, waving his arms, shouting at the top of his lungs, praying it would retreat. The lion stood its ground, unimpressed by his bravado, but Sarah, too, felt the fire of bravery awaken within her. Driven by instinct, she focused on the cattle, shouting and waving to herd them back, feeling every muscle in her body tense with the pressure of the moment. The tension in the air crackled like lightning. Slowly, she felt the cattle respond to her voice, moving away from the danger just as Jesse managed to break the lion's stare. With a final roar, the beast retreated into the tall grass, leaving a tense silence in its wake. With the lion gone, Jesse breathed a sigh of relief but didn't waste a second. He turned to check on Sarah. "You did it." His pride in her surged like wildfire, eclipsing his own worry. "I can't believe it worked," she stammered, her brow still furrowed with disbelief. But before they could fully celebrate, a sudden crash echoed from behind them. A barn door had swung open, and a flustered worker stumbled out, eyes wide with fear. He gasped, his breath coming out in short bursts. Jesse replied, his chest rising and falling with exhilaration. The workers quickly regrouped, and Sarah felt their gazes shift from disbelief to admiration. It was a small victory, but a significant one. As the sun began to dip, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, it felt like the world had shifted. Sarah's heartbeat still raced, but it was different now. She wasn't just a cursed girl. She was a crucial part of saving the day, something she never thought possible. Over the next few weeks, the rumors subsided, replaced with the whispers of admiration. People started to see Sarah differently. They began to notice her fierce spirit, the way she interacted with the horses, the tenderness she showed in caring for the cattle. Jesse watched it all with quiet pride, cherishing the way she blossomed under the sun. Every day was a new adventure, a ride through the fields, the sun warming their backs. Jesse taught her not just how to ride, but how to feel free. They shared stories around the campfire, laughing and sometimes falling silent, simply enjoying being together. She began to feel like she belonged, not just in his world, but in her own skin. She asked one evening, the stars twinkling above them like tiny diamonds scattered across the sky. He asked, poking the fire to keep it alive, the flames crackling as they rose. "Life before," she said, the words coming out slowly. Jesse paused, considering his own journey. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I think every choice leads us to where we need to be." That night, sleep came hard for Sarah. Despite the calm that filled the air, questions swirled in her mind. Was she really free? And could she finally shed the label everyone had given her? Days turned into weeks. With every sunset shared and every challenge faced, her bond with Jesse deepened. But the past clawed at her heels, threatening to pull her back. Each time she thought she had escaped the curse, a voice would whisper, reminding her of her tragedy. One afternoon, Sarah rode out to the edge of town, her heart heavy. She needed to confront the specters of her past. As she approached the familiar faces that had once mocked her, a sense of dread filled her, but she pressed on, dismounting and standing firm. She shouted, her voice trembling but resolute. The townsfolk turned to look, surprise etched across their faces. Sarah felt like she was standing on a cliff, ready to plunge into an abyss, but she stood tall, memories of Jesse's unwavering faith lifting her spirit. "I've learned to fight," she proclaimed, each word seeping courage into her heart. "You don't know me." As she spoke, the crowd fell into a tense silence. Some looked away, others glanced at each other with uncertainty. And then came a ripple of unexpected responses, a quiet hum of agreement. "I've seen you, Sarah," a woman finally said, her voice steady. "You saved those cattle." As more stories of her bravery emerged, something remarkable started to happen. The townsfolk began to murmur among themselves, some even beginning to step closer. In that moment, Sarah felt a shift, a tiny glimmer of acceptance sparking in the air, pushing back against the shadows of her past. It felt like a fragile thread had been woven between them, the kind that slowly began to stitch wounds healed by understanding. After that confrontation, a slow transformation took place. The townsfolk began to approach her not with judgment but with curiosity. In small ways, they started to include her, a friendly wave, an acknowledgement during town meetings, conversations filled with a light she had long thought extinguished. One sunny afternoon, Jessie rode into town beside her, the air ripe with the promise of summer. Their laughter danced in the air as townsfolk waved and greeted them. He said, a gleam in his eye, "This feels incredible," Sarah admitted, her spirit lifting with each passing moment. "And it's just the beginning," Jessie replied, casting her a knowing glance. But as life in Dry Gulch embraced her, another storm brewed on the horizon. One harsh winter, the cattle became restless, the feed dwindled low. The town faced a tough decision, whether to break their long-standing tradition of being self-sufficient. They called a town meeting. Jessie and Sarah rode alongside each other, a united front against adversity. The tension was palpable, and Sarah felt the weight of her past chasing her. "Maybe we should sell a few cows," one farm owner argued, desperation in his eyes. "It's tough out there." "No," Jessie interjected, his voice ringing clear. "We can make it through together." Sarah could feel eyes on her, a mix of hope and skepticism swirling in the room. The murmurs echoed around her, and suddenly she realized it was time to reclaim the narrative. "Everyone here knows hard times," she stepped forward, finding strength in her voice. "We've faced storms, but just look at what we've accomplished as a community." Voices rose, some in frustration, others in agreement, but Sarah pressed on. "They called me cursed, but through every storm I found a new strength." At first, the room erupted with mixed shouts, fear clashing against hope. But then, one by one, they began to see her not as a girl with a shadow, but as a true member of their community. Eventually, after hours of heated debate, optimism started to replace despair. They came to realize that in dire times it was unity, not division, that could lead them through. As the meeting wrapped up, Jessie turned to Sarah, a wide grin spreading across his face. "I couldn't have without you," she said, her tone filled with gratitude. Days turned into weeks as they worked tirelessly, pulling together all their resources. The town began to thrive again, fueled by the strength of community and camaraderie, and Sarah stood proudly amongst them, no longer an outcast but a beacon of resilience. As spring approached, the fields burst with vibrant blooms and the promise of new beginnings. Sarah felt finally at home in Dry Gulch, not just as Jessie's friend, but as a vital part of its heart. With every sunrise, a new chapter unfolded, one filled with laughter, acceptance, and unwavering determination. She had confronted her past and emerged stronger, reminding everyone that the ties of fate could be rewoven into something magnificent. In the heart of the vast and wild plains, a cowboy and the girl once called cursed became an inseparable pair, a reminder that love, courage, and the strength to rise above all can create a home where dreams take flight. Together, they had weathered every storm, discovering that the curse that once threatened to define her had transformed into a story of hope and triumph. And as they rode side by side into the endless horizon, a new adventure awaited, a journey shaped by the land, their dreams, and the unbreakable bond they had forged. On a sweltering July afternoon, the horizon shimmered with heat, an endless stretch of twisted grass and sun-baked dirt. A storm was brewing, but in the small, dust-choked town of Dry Gulch, it was another kind of tempest swirling beneath the surface. The townsfolk had gathered outside the saloon, whispering and pointing at a figure that lingered on the edge of town, a girl not much older than 16, with tangled hair and eyes that held storms of their own. They called her cursed. No one knew exactly when it started or why the girl had been marked. Rumors flew around like tumbleweeds. A broken family. A string of tragedies. It was as if misfortune clung to her like an unfriendly shadow. Parents left, friends deserted her, and what remained of her life was built on the quicksand of pity and fear. That afternoon, Sarah Mae stood alone at the edge of the saloon, her heart pounding in her ears. She felt the weight of the stairs piercing through her like arrows, each one a reminder of all she had lost. They all knew her history, the stories of calamity surrounding her like a dark cloud. But today she couldn't hide. Today, she would need to confront the whispers that followed her everywhere. The sudden clang of the saloon doors swung open, jolting her from her thoughts. Jesse McAllister strode out, a tall, rugged cowboy with a weathered face that held the wisdom of the plains. He was known around town as a man who could tame wild horses and wrangle trouble with the same ease. But he was different. He saw beyond the surface, and something about Sarah drew him in. He called out, wrapping his arms around his broad shoulders, his smile bright against the gray clouds looming overhead. Her heart raced as she turned to face him. "Hey, Jesse," she replied, wary but hopeful. He was the only person in town who did not treat her like a ghost. He said, strolling closer. "Just needed some air," she replied, looking down at her worn boots. The truth weighed heavily on her. She wanted to feel free, to escape the judgments that tethered her to a past she couldn't change. Jesse seemed to sense her struggle. "Want to help me with the cattle today? They could use an extra hand," he suggested, his tone casual, but there was an earnestness in his eyes. Sarah hesitated. The thought of working alongside him filled her with nervous excitement. "Okay," she finally said, unease battling with anticipation. As they made their way toward the wide-open fields, the weight of the townsfolk's gaze felt lighter. The emerald grass swayed gently underfoot, the sun breaking through the clouds like a promise. For the first time in a long while, she felt the stirrings of hope. But as they approached the corral, a sudden gust of wind whipped across the prairie, almost knocking Sarah off balance. That's when they heard it, a low, deep-throated growl. Jesse's expression shifted instantly, concern flashing in his eyes. He shouted, pulling Sarah behind him. The growl transformed into a snarl, and out of the thicket emerged a mountain lion, sleek and powerful, its eyes locked on them like a predator sizing up its prey. Panic surged through Sarah. She whispered, her heart racing. "We stand our ground," Jesse replied, a steadiness anchoring his words. As the lion snarled and prowled closer, Jesse slowly raised his hands, ready to defend. Time slowed. Memories of the townsfolk's taunts flooded Sarah's mind. Cursed. A misfit. But as she stood there, trembling, she felt something within her awaken a fierce sense of survival. In that moment, she couldn't be just a shadow. She took a deep breath, stepping beside Jesse, determination burning brighter than fear. Together, they faced the beast. "If we stand strong, it might back off," Jesse murmured, his eyes never wavering from the lion. With a sudden movement, Sarah picked up a sturdy branch lying on the ground. "We can't let it take us down," she said, emboldened by Jesse's resolve. The lion, sensing the shift in their energy, hesitated for a moment. Jesse said, and Sarah nodded, adrenaline pumping through her veins. "1, 2, they bellowed together, their voices roaring against the rustling winds. The lion paused, startled for a moment. Then, perhaps sensing their defiance, it turned and dashed back into the safety of the thicket. Sarah gasped for breath, her heart racing. She couldn't believe it. Jesse turned to her, a grin breaking across his face. They both laughed, the tension fading as the weight of the moment lifted. For the first time, Sarah felt the taste of victory. She had stood against fear, and it had not claimed her. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the fields as they returned to the ranch. The laughter echoed, breaking the silence that had trailed Sarah for so long. The townsfolk would still harbor their whispers, but today something had shifted. As the days rolled on, Jesse and Sarah continued their routine, working side by side. Every sunrise promised hope. Every hard day carved memories into the fabric of their growing bond. Jesse taught her everything he knew about cattle, horses, and the pulse of the land. Back on the ranch, we don't just care for them, we understand them, he'd say, as they brushed the horses together, the sun illuminating the warmth of compassionate care. Sarah finally asked one day as they sat by the corral after a long day's work, "Because I see you. Not the rumors, but the fire inside," Jesse replied, leaning back against the fence, his blue eyes shining with conviction. "You're tough, Sarah." Those words settled deep within her, mingling with the feelings she had long buried. A strength blossomed in her heart, but the real test awaited them. One day, Sarah decided to ride into town. The looming specters of the past gnawed at her resolve. Could she really step into that world again? Could she show them she wasn't the girl they thought she was? She mounted her horse, Daisy, and rode toward Dry Gulch, the familiar roads twisting beneath her. Her heart raced with every step. People going about their business looked on, eyes narrowing at her approach. She could almost hear the whispers swirling around her head. As she entered the center of town, the conversations quieted, expressions shifting from indifference to judgment. Fear climbed into her throat as she could feel them freeze, waiting for her to stumble, to falter. But she remembered Jesse's words. She had fought a lion, she could overcome this. "Hello," she said, lifting her chin, forcing the weight off her heart. They watched her, uncertainty fizzling in the air. A few nodded, but most remained stony-faced. Sarah's heart ached, but she pressed on. "I'm here to show you I'm not what you think. I saved cattle, faced a mountain lion." A murmur swept through the crowd. Some exchanged glances, skepticism mingling with intrigue. A woman stepped forward, her hands on her hips, a frown etched across her brow. "I don't need to change your mind," Sarah replied, her voice gaining strength. Suddenly, a young boy stepped forward, his wide eyes breaking the tension. "I saw you, Sarah." The atmosphere shifted, whispers of curiosity replacing cold skepticism. They began to remember not just the rumors, but her actions. With each passing moment, the air thickened with possibility. One by one, individuals started to soften, their walls crumbling. By the time Sarah rode back home, the weight of the world felt a little lighter. As Sarah sat by the fire that night, she could see the flicker of pride in Jesse's eyes. "You faced them," he said, filling her cup with hearty stew. "I couldn't have done it without you," she smiled, warmth filling her chest. The days turned into weeks, and slowly the hard winter turned to spring. The earth breathed anew beneath the sun, and the ranch flourished. With every dawn, Sarah felt more alive and accepted, her connection with Jesse deepening into uncharted territory. Yet life on the ranch wasn't without challenges. One day, as they were preparing for a cattle drive, disaster struck. A heavy storm rolled in suddenly dark clouds swirling overhead like a malevolent beast. In the distance, they could hear the rumblings of thunder, a signal of trouble ahead. Jesse shouted over the din of the rising winds. Sarah replied, adrenaline coursing through her veins as she rallied beside him. They rode hard, their hearts pounding in a synchronized beat against the storm. But as they raced against time, the skies opened up, a torrential downpour soaking them to the bone. The wind howled, the thunder crashing like an army marching forward. In the madness, a calf suddenly broke from the herd, bolting in the opposite direction. "Sarah!" Jesse shouted, urgency flooding his voice. Her heart raced as she saw the small calf ahead, panic-stricken and lost. Adrenaline surged through her. She declared, steering Daisy swiftly, her focus narrowing. Jesse warned, fear etched in his face as they maneuvered through the chaos. As they raced after the calf, the ground turned muddy underfoot, and the rain lashed against them like an unyielding whip. Sarah felt every instinct kicking into gear. She could sense the calf's fear, mirroring her own. She called out, her heart pounding. With sheer determination, Sarah managed to guide the calf back, following it with persistence. They charged through the torrent of rain, inching closer until finally she reached out, her grip steady and reassuring. "That's it," she shouted, urging the calf toward Jesse, who was positioned to pull it back into the herd. With one last push, together they steered it back, the storm almost swallowing them whole. As they finally regrouped with the rest of the cattle, Sarah's heart swelled. They had done it against the storm, against the odds. The rain began to ease, and exhaustion washed over her like a wave. Coming back to the ranch, drenched but victorious, Sarah and Jesse shared knowing glances, the bond forged deeper than ever. They had faced fear head-on, and together they had triumphed. That night, as they sat around the fire, the crackling flames illuminated their faces. "You were amazing out there," Jesse said, the pride evident in his voice. "I couldn't have done it without you by my side," she replied, confidence blooming within her. And just like that, in the glow of the firelight, they became more than just partners in ranch life. They became soulmates, intertwined by the battles they'd fought, by the resilience they had shared. As the days rolled on, acceptance blanketed Dry Gulch like a warm embrace. The townsfolk began to see Sarah for who she truly was, an audacious spirit who refused to bow to the curse laid upon her. Riding alongside Jesse, she flourished, proving that the storm inside her had birthed strength. Their journey had only just begun, but Sarah knew one thing for certain. She was no longer the girl everyone called cursed. She was Sarah Mae, the warrior of the plains, steadfast and proud, standing strong among the roaring winds of life, embracing every challenge that came their way. And together, surrounded by the beauty of the wilds and the hope of new tomorrows, they rode into the horizon, ready to face whatever awaited them, their hearts beating as one. The air was thick with tension, a tension that even the heavy clouds above couldn't dampen. Sarah Mae stood at the edge of Dry Gulch, her heart racing as she watched the townsfolk gather at the saloon, their laughter spilling out into the street. But it felt like sharp daggers aimed at her heart. It was a familiar echo, one that had shadowed her for most of her life. Just then, an unexpected clap of thunder rumbled overhead, and the storm broke, heavy rain cascading down. Sarah raced toward the shelter of a nearby barn, desperate for cover. She could feel the eyes of the townspeople still watching her, the familiar weight pressing down on her shoulders. "You don't belong here," they seemed to say, even without words. As she stumbled into the barn, soaked to the bone, Sarah caught sight of a tall figure standing with his back to her. Jesse McAllister, a cowboy with a reputation for bravery, was tending to his horse. He was known for his strong hands and fierce heart, respected among the men and somewhat of a mystery to the women of the town. She had always admired him from a distance, but now, in this moment of vulnerability, she felt oddly drawn to him. Jesse called over his shoulder, recognizing her presence even before she spoke. The kindness in his voice stopped her in her tracks. I just need to get out of the rain," she stammered, embarrassment creeping in. "Come on in," he said, turning to face her. His blue eyes held warmth amidst the storm, and she felt a flicker of something stir inside her, a semblance of safety. Sarah took a tentative step inside the barn, shaking off her wet hair as she studied him. Jesse was everything she admired: strong, confident, yet somehow approachable. In the reflection of the dim light filtering in, she saw the curving lines of his smile. "Looks like you've caught quite a downpour," he said, a hint of amusement dancing in his tone. "Yeah, well, I'm used to it," Sarah replied, forcing a chuckle. For a moment, it felt like the weight of the town's judgment lifted, allowing her to breathe. As the rain pattered heavily against the roof, they talked, sharing snippets of their lives. Sarah learned about Jesse's upbringing, a boy raised on the vast, wide plains, a child of the land. He spoke of the wild horses he had tamed and the adventures he'd had out in the territories. Every word from his mouth drew her in further, and in return she found herself sharing her own story, not the one the townsfolk spoke of, but the real one. The broken family, the misfortunes that followed her, the way she had been cast aside by everyone she once trusted. For the first time, she felt seen, truly seen, through the eyes of someone who refused to label her as cursed. "I don't think you're cursed," Jesse said earnestly, fixing her with a steady gaze. His words hit her like a warm breeze in the middle of winter. In that moment, she realized how desperately she had craved understanding. As the storm began to let up, a thought nagged at her. She mused aloud, her voice trembling slightly. "You'll fit in where you find your strength," Jesse replied, his voice low and confident. The rain finally subsided, leaving the world outside fresh and washed, the earth glistening beneath a brightening sky. But when Sarah stepped outside, she felt as if the storm had stirred up something more inside her than just moisture. It awakened a determination she never knew she possessed. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah found herself spending more time at Jesse's ranch. He had taken her in under his wing, teaching her how to ride horses, mend fences, and tend to the cattle. With every task, she grew more confident, more empowered. The little town of Dry Gulch became her second home, and slowly its whispers started to soften. One evening, they rode out to a secluded hill overlooking the valley, the sun dipping low and painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. As they sat side by side, Sarah took a deep breath, filled with a sense of belonging and freedom she had never known before. "Maybe I was just waiting for the right person to see it," she replied, a smile breaking across her face. But just as they began to laugh, shadows fell across their moment. A group of men from town appeared on horseback, their expressions hard and accusing. They approached with an air of authority, surrounding Sarah and Jesse like a thick fog shrouding the sun. One of the men asked, his voice dripping with disdain. Jesse's jaw tightened as he narrowed his gaze. "She's not cursed. Stronger, You're risking your reputation defending a girl who's brought nothing but bad luck to this town." Another man scoffed, disdain mingling with impatience. Sarah felt the flush of anger rising in her chest, a storm brewing within her more intense than any weather she had ever faced. "I'm more than just a label," she shouted, her voice echoing against the hills. They laughed at her, mocking her courage, but Jesse stepped forward, unwavering in the tide of their ridicule. "You don't know what you're talking about. Sarah has faced more than most of you can imagine, and she stands tall despite it all." The men simmered, unsure how to respond. A moment of silence stretched thin between them. Then, with a growl of frustration, they turned their horses and rode off, leaving Sarah and Jesse in an aching quiet. Jesse asked, concern etched on his brow as he turned to her. I don't know," she admitted, feeling the burn of humiliation rise in waves. "They're right." "No," he said firmly, his voice steady. "They just don't understand." She asked, her voice trembling with doubt. "If you focus on the weight, it will bury you," he said, gently lifting her chin so that their eyes met. His words sank deep into her heart, igniting a spark of resilience. With each passing day, Sarah took that light and turned it into action. She began to change things not just for herself, but for those around her. The townsfolk might have seen her as a curse, but she was determined to show them how powerful she truly was. With Jesse by her side, she organized community events, the first rodeo Dry Gulch had seen in years. She worked tirelessly, engaging everyone in the planning, bridging gaps, and forming friendships she never thought could exist. As they all came together, a sense of belonging blossomed, fueled by laughter and hope. On the day of the rodeo, the anticipation electrified the air. Children ran about, their laughter mingling with the chomping of hooves and the cheers of the spectators. For the first time in ages, Sarah felt like she truly belonged. Lots of eyes turned toward her, and the murmurs that filled the arena were different this time, filled with kindness and admiration. As she rode into the arena atop a spirited mare, she felt the weight of fear lift from her shoulders. The moment felt magical as she felt herself embraced by the thrill of riding, the pulse of the crowd, and the warmth of Jesse's encouragement. But midway through the event, doubt crept in like a thief. A loud crash echoed and a horse stumbled, throwing its rider. Panic surged through the crowd, the energy shifting. Sarah's heart raced, but Jesse caught her eye and gave a slight nod, as if to remind her of the strength they had forged together. Sarah shouted, sprinting toward the fallen rider. Adrenaline charged through her veins once more as she took control of the situation, urging the nearby horses to calm down and making her way to the rider, who was now on the ground nursing an injury. She asked, her voice steady, while she helped to assess the damage. "I think I twisted my ankle," the rider groaned, wincing. "Stay still. We're going to get you help," she reassured, even as her heart threatened to race away from her. Within moments, Jesse was by her side, crouching down to help. Together, they assisted the rider back to standing, their teamwork flowing effortlessly as they moved like two branches growing from the same tree. As they led the injured rider away from the tumultuous scene, Sarah realized for the first time that she could navigate through chaos. She was not just a girl cursed, she was a leader, a fighter, and a healer. Later that night, they stood together in the glow of the setting sun, the cool breeze brushing across their faces. "You were incredible today," Jesse said, pride lighting his eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied, a soft smile gracing her lips. For the first time, she felt whole, unburdened. She wasn't just defined by what had happened in her past. As the warmth enveloped them, Sarah turned to Jesse, a thought forming in her mind. She asked cautiously, her dreams dancing on the edge of her voice. He paused, looking deeply into her eyes. "You can have anything you set your heart on, Sarah." In that moment, under the expansive sky painted with stars, Sarah Mae fully embraced who she was becoming, a girl who had faced storms and monsters alike, a girl who was ready to rewrite her story. With each dawn that followed, she rode into the future, embracing her passions and her determination to carve a new path not just for herself, but for others like her. The laughter from the rodeo mingled with the ghostly whispers that once haunted her. But now they transformed into a distant memory, a reminder of how far she had come and how deeply she had chosen to embrace who she was destined to be. And as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, painting the world in shimmering gold, Sarah knew that it was only the beginning. She was Sarah Mae, and she was here to stay. Together with Jesse and those who embraced her, they would face whatever storms awaited hand in hand, unyielding as the vast plains spread before them. The wind whipped through the small town of Dry Gulch, carrying with it the whispers of the townsfolk, a low hum that filled the air with fear and judgment. "She's cursed," they said. It was a chilly morning when Sarah Mae stood at the edge of town, the chill seeping into her bones. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the weight of those whispers drape over her shoulders like a heavy coat. She had lived in this town for as long as she could remember, but it felt like a prison now. Just then, thunder rumbled in the distance. The sky darkened, and rain began to fall in heavy droplets. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped toward the nearby barn, her refuge from the storm and the judgment that followed her. She needed to escape not just the rain, but the life she had always known. Inside the barn, the smell of hay and leather was comforting and familiar. She leaned against a stall, watching the rain pour, feeling as if it were washing away the weight of her past. Her heart ached with loneliness. Friends had once surrounded her, laughter shared over sunlit days, but misfortune had a way of chasing them all away. Just then, the heavy door creaked open, gusts of wind pushing into the shelter. A tall figure stepped inside, shaking off droplets from his hat. Jesse McAllister, the town's most respected cowboy. He had a rugged look about him, with strong hands and eyes that seemed to light up against the storm. "Hey there," he said, nodding in her direction, his tone friendly yet commanding. Sarah replied, instinctively bracing herself. She sensed that people still treated her differently, and Jesse was no exception. "I just wanted to check on you," he said, stepping closer. "You're not out there on your own, are you?" "It'll be fine," she muttered, a hint of defiance creeping into her voice, but deep down she was grateful for his concern. Jesse studied her for a moment, then sighed. "Look, I know how they talk about you." The words hung in the air heavy. She challenged, her heart thumping. "I know enough," he replied. "I see you come in here and you don't need to be alone." At that moment, something shifted in her. She didn't know whether it was the honesty in his eyes or the sincerity in his voice, but she felt a spark of hope igniting within her. "Help, cursed or not, everyone deserves a chance," Jesse said, crossing his arms. "You've been carrying a heavy load for too long." She hesitated, a lifetime of fear holding her back. But the storm grew louder, the rain hammering against the barn, drowning out her doubts. "Ride with me tomorrow and help with the cattle. Get to know the land," he offered. Somewhere deep inside, a flicker of excitement sparked. "Fine," she said, surprising herself. The next morning, dawn broke like a promise over the plains, the sun spilling golden light across the fields. Sarah stood by the barn, heart racing as she prepared to ride. Her hands were clammy with nerves. The doubts echoed louder than before. Then Jesse appeared with a horse, a beautiful mare, sleek and strong. "Meet Misty. She's a good one," he said, a glint of pride in his eyes. Sarah smiled timidly, feeling a rush of adrenaline surge through her. "First you mount her, just be gentle," Jesse instructed, his voice calm and reassuring. She took a deep breath, stepping forward and carefully pulling herself onto Misty's back. The moment her feet settled into the stirrups, a thrill raced through her. Sarah felt powerful for the first time in a long while. "Just like that. Now we'll lead the herd," Jesse encouraged, guiding her with gentle nudges of direction. As they rode into the sunlit pasture, something washed over Sarah, a feeling of freedom she had never known. The rhythm of Misty's hooves against the ground synced perfectly with her heartbeat. The worries and fearful whispers that had haunted her began to fade into the wind. But soon, as they gathered the cattle, chaos erupted. A sudden storm rolled in, dark clouds boiling above. Cattle began to moo in distress, and panic ensued. Sarah's heart raced as she fought to control Misty, who became restless beneath her. Jesse shouted, his voice cutting through the storm. Sarah yelled back, fear threatening to grip her, but in that moment of panic, something clicked. She felt Jesse's calm focus penetrate her frayed nerves, and she began to breathe, focusing on the rhythm of the horse and the cattle. "Come on, Sarah." Jesse's encouragement ignited that little spark of strength within her. She guided Misty gently, feeling empowered as they steered the cattle back into their pen. The storm didn't control her, she controlled the storm. They worked in unison, a ballet of horse and rider embracing the elements. The adrenaline pumped through her veins, igniting a sense of purpose she hadn't felt before. As the storm passed, the sun re-emerged, glistening through the droplets clinging to the grass. They returned to the ranch, panting and exhilarated. Jesse exclaimed, pride illuminating his features. Sarah beamed, adrenaline still coursing through her. In the days that followed, Sarah became a part of Jesse's world. She learned to ride, to rope, to handle the land with confidence. Each day allowed her to peel back layers of doubt and insecurity. The townsfolk began to take notice too. With each laugh shared and each task accomplished, they couldn't ignore her transformation. One evening, under a sky painted with stars, Sarah and Jesse sat beside the campfire, the warmth surrounding them like a hug. "You know," she started, her voice soft, "I used to believe I was cursed, but now—" "Stops here," Jesse interjected, his expression serious. "You'll never be cursed. You're not what they say, you're a fighter." For the first time, Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, the weight of years lifting. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling as the warmth of acceptance enveloped her. Yet it wasn't long before darkness crept back in. Rumors of misfortune stirred like a restless wind, seeping through town. One afternoon, as they returned to the ranch, a group of men confronted Jesse. Their faces were twisted into angry expressions, their eyes filled with accusation. "You should stay away from her," one of the men declared, his voice icy. "She's brought enough misfortune." Jesse's posture shifted, eyes narrowing. "Don't speak about her like that." "Watch out," one man jeered. As they turned to leave, Sarah felt the heat rise in her cheeks. "I don't want to be a burden," she murmured, filled with doubt. "You're not a burden," Jesse insisted, stepping closer. "You're not cursed." But the words of the townsfolk still echoed in her mind, a haunting reminder that some parts of her past felt inescapable. She worried that no matter the courage she displayed, those whispers would forever follow her. That night, Sarah stood by the water trough, trying to quiet her racing thoughts. Jesse approached, sensing her turmoil. "You can't let them get to you," he said softly. "I'm tired of being judged, Jesse," she confessed, the vulnerability seeping through. "Then fight for it," Jesse said, his determination shining. Taking a deep breath, Sarah felt a flicker of hope ignite in her heart. He was right. There was no point in living in fear of what others believed. She needed to forge her own path. In the days following, she focused on empowering herself. She helped organize community events, inviting the townsfolk to gather in the spirit of unity. The more she engaged with the people of Dry Gulch, the more they started to see her, not as a cursed girl, but as a genuine part of their community. As summer approached, the annual rodeo was on the horizon, and Sarah knew this was her chance to prove herself once and for all. With Jesse's encouragement, she entered the competition. On the day of the rodeo, the sun shone brightly above, the townsfolk thrumming with excitement. As Sarah stepped into the arena, the laughter and cheers rang around her. But as she caught sight of the familiar faces that had whispered behind her back, doubt crept back in. She clenched her jaw, fighting the tremor in her hands. "You can do this," Jesse reassured her, standing nearby, watching with unwavering support. With determination, Sarah mounted her horse and took a deep breath. She remembered the challenges she had faced and the battles she had fought. This time, she wouldn't allow fear to shadow her. As the competition began, she rode with a fierce spirit. Each obstacle she tackled as she guided her horse through the course felt both exhilarating and terrifying. The adrenaline coursed through her body, and with every successful maneuver, the cheers from the crowd began to swell. For the first time, Sarah felt the weight of the past lifting. The laughter surrounding her became a melody, reflecting acceptance and admiration. She was not cursed, she was a force of nature, unyielding in the face of adversity. By the end of the day, Sarah stepped down from Misty, her heart soaring. She hadn't just survived the rodeo, she had thrived. Jesse was there, a proud smile plastered across his face. He hugged her tightly, lifting her off her feet. She laughed, feeling light as air. But just as they were reveling in the victory, the group of men from earlier confronted them once more. This time they seemed taken aback. "I do," Sarah responded firmly, a newfound confidence radiating from her. The men's eyes widened, and for a moment the tension hung in the air before they turned and rode away, leaving Sarah standing tall amongst the cheers. As the sun set behind the horizon, casting hues of orange and purple across the sky, Sarah Mae felt the last remnants of doubt dissolve completely. She was never cursed. She was simply human, a spirit forged by fire, a heart tempered by hardship. The next morning, as she rode alongside Jesse, who grinned over at her, she knew one thing for certain. No one could define her story but herself. The past may have shaped her, but it would never confine her again. For the storms had passed, and now she stood ready to face the future, hand in hand with the cowboy who had taken her in, together riding boldly into the horizon of possibility, fearless, unbreakable, and undeniably free. Thunder crackled in the distance, a warning that lingered in the air. It was a wild night in Dry Gulch, the kind of night when shadows stretched like fingers across the ground, and storms weren't the only thing stirring. Sarah Mae stood in the center of the bustling saloon, heart racing, feeling every pair of eyes focused squarely on her. Whispers cut through the chatter, sharp as knives. It had been years since that label had seeped into her life, a poison whispered by those who feared what they didn't understand. Rumors of misfortune, accidents, and heartbreak followed her like a relentless shadow. But tonight, with dark clouds swirling outside, she felt particularly fragile, as if the weight of every whispered word was heavier than the storm threatening to break. "Watch out!" a drunken voice barked from the corner. Laughter followed, harsh and mocking, but Sarah squared her shoulders, refusing to let it break her. It was a mask she wore, a fragile facade of bravery enough for today. Just as the laughter roared again, the saloon doors creaked open and a gust of cold wind rushed in. Jesse McAllister stepped through, tall and rugged, a cowboy made of grit and dust. He scanned the room, and when his eyes landed on Sarah, the world around them faded like an old photograph. There was something in his gaze that made her feel like she wasn't just a cursed girl, but a person worth seeing. "Sarah," he called out, his voice cutting through the noise like a knife. He strode toward her with a steady confidence that made heads turn, cutting through the tides of judgment. "Heard you're the lucky charm around here," he joked, a light grin creeping onto his weathered face. Sarah's heart fluttered. "Some lucky charm," she replied, forcing a smile. "No," he said, his tone serious. He reached out, placing a warm hand on her shoulder, grounding her in that moment. But the laughter around them intensified, a cacophony of jeers and taunts. "What do you want with her, McAllister?" "Yeah, Jesse," another voice chimed. The mocking rang through the saloon, each word laced with venom, a reminder of her reality. Jesse bellowed, forcing the laughter to stutter into silence. The room held its breath. "Sarah Mae is not just a name on your lips, she's a person." The tension crackled like the lightning that flickered outside, and Sarah looked up at Jesse, her heart swelling with gratitude. But as the laughter faded, uncertainty curled in her stomach. No matter how protective he was right now, could he see her as more than a burden? Just then, the storm unleashed outside, rain hammering against the windows, drowning out the final echoes of laughter. Jesse turned back to Sarah, concern etching his features. Before she could respond, he took her by the arm, leading her away from the judging eyes. They pushed through the saloon doors and into the night, the rain soaking them in seconds. "Jesse, I can't thank you enough," she stammered, struggling to keep up with his long strides. "I won't let people treat you like that," he replied, a fierce spark in his eyes. "You deserve better. Now let's get to my place. I've got an extra horse." Her heart raced at the thought. Riding meant freedom, a chance to escape the suffocating label that had clung to her like a second skin. "Okay," she agreed, a flicker of courage igniting within her. As they hurried through the rain, the world around them faded, the sound of the storm blending with the pounding of their hearts. They arrived at Jesse's ranch, a sprawling expanse lined with wooden fences and wide-open fields. The air was fresh and invigorating, promising something new, something bold. Inside, the warmth enveloped her like a hug, and she could hear the sound of the rain splattering against the roof, a symphony that calmed her racing heart. "Hang tight, I'll get the horses," Jesse said, disappearing into a back room. The moment alone felt surreal. Each breath she took felt richer in this space, free of judgment, full of potential. When Jesse returned, he let out a magnificent stallion, its coat shining in the dim light. "This is Duke. He's got spirit just like you," he said with a grin, his hands resting on the saddle. Sarah exclaimed, taking a careful step closer. He is, but don't let that intimidate you. You just need to find the rhythm. Absolutely, she said, her fear melting away as excitement surged in its place. Minutes later, Sarah found herself atop Duke, her heart racing as she tried to balance herself in the saddle. Easy there, Jessie coaxed, standing beside her with an encouraging smile. You need to feel him. As they moved out into the open air, she could feel the rain beginning to let up, the clouds parting, letting the stars shimmer through. The world around her felt alive, the energy in the air thrumming with potential. Riding Duke, she experienced a rush she had never known, a rush of truly being free. She moved with the horse, feeling the bond grow between them. Each step Duke took ignited a sense of confidence, and she found herself laughing, reveling in the moment. But just as quickly as joy filled her heart, it darkened when thunder rolled again, this time closer. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying a chill that ran down her spine. She called, her voice tinged with unease. "Stay calm, Sarah." "Keep riding," he urged, glancing at her, then up at the darkening sky. A few moments later, the world seemed to shift. The bright stars dimmed, and in the distance, shadows moved. She asked, anxiety creeping in. Before Jessie could respond, a group of men on horseback emerged from the darkness, their figures intimidating against the fading light. They approached quickly, and Sarah's gut twisted with dread. McAllister, their leader, a man named Dawson, sneered, eyes narrowed as they further closed the distance. "Mind your own business, Dawson," Jessie replied, his voice even but steely. Dawson laughed, thick with mockery. "Looks more like you're riding to your doom, cowboy. You really want to hang around with that girl." Sarah felt the heat rise to her cheeks, every word stinging like a slap. She thought of the whispers, the way the townsfolk branded her. She shouted, her voice rising above the tension. "Keep your mouth shut, girl." "You don't want trouble," Dawson warned, his smirk only growing wider as he relished the cruelty. "You don't have to listen to him," Jessie said, edging his horse closer to Sarah's. But as they turned to ride away, Dawson lunged forward, blocking their path. "You think you can just walk away?" He gestured to his men, who fanned out to create a wall that closed in around them. Fear ignited in Sarah's chest, but Jessie clenched his jaw, not backing down. "Let's see how fearless you are when you're riding into the storm," Dawson taunted. In that moment, the world felt heavy. Thunder rumbled overhead, a warning that mirrored the tension in the air. "That's it," Dawson yelled, charging forward, his men following in close pursuit. With no time to think, Sarah's instincts kicked in. "Jessie!" She felt Duke shift under her, sensing the fear that electrified the atmosphere. Jessie shouted, urging his horse forward. They raced through the night, hearts pounding, thunder clapping in the sky like the world itself was angry. As they galloped into the storm, rain began to pour heavily again, creating a chaos that mirrored the turmoil boiling within Sarah. Soon they found themselves racing toward the outskirts of town, but the shadows were closing in. Then, without warning, one of Dawson's men surged forward, cutting them off. The tension surged as Sarah threw a glance over her shoulder, feeling trapped. She screamed, panic rising. Jessie shouted, his voice strong and resolute. But as they charged through the torrential rain, the unexpected happened. Sarah felt Duke slip beneath her, just a second too late to react. The world spun as she tumbled, hitting the muddy ground hard. Jessie's voice thundered through the chaos, panic flooding over him. He reined Duke to a halt, leaping down to help her. Her breath caught in her throat, pain radiating through her arm as she tried to rise. "I can't." Despair washed over her as she struggled, feeling the weight of the storm and the men closing in. "Stay down, I'll handle this," Jessie said, determination etched in his expression. He pivoted, facing the approaching men, fists clenched. "You want to fight?" But as shadows loomed ever closer, Sarah realized this was a turning point. The storm around them raged, but within her, a fire was igniting. This wasn't just about perceived curses. It was about standing tall against the tides that sought to bury her. Jessie, fighting valiantly with all he had, gave her the encouragement she needed. "Sarah, you've got to get up. You were born to ride." The world blurred as fear and pain melded with adrenaline. She forced herself to her feet, feeling the strength coursing through her. She wasn't just a girl anymore. She was a warrior, and instinct kicked in. Sarah shouted, summoning all her courage, ready to stand beside him, ready to push back against the storm. And just like that, the tides began to shift. Bound together, they faced the darkness, united against a world that had tried to define them. This was their moment, raw and electric, a hurricane of determination against the shadows that threatened to overwhelm them. As the thunder rolled again and the storm closed in, Sarah felt clarity. Whether cursed or gifted, she was determined to embrace who she had become. As fists flew and shadows clashed, she knew the battle had only just begun, and whatever came next would change everything. She was ready, and so was Jesse, standing tall at her side. Together, they would ride into the storm of their lives, courage clashing against the darkness, unaware of what awaited them just beyond the range.